Welcome to Claws and Crime Chronicles, where we dive deep into the dark and enigmatic world of true crime and mystery. Today, we unravel the eerie story of Graham Young, known as the Teacup Killer. Prepare to be captivated by a tale where poison lurked in the most unsuspecting places. In the shadowy realms of criminal history, there are tales that defy explanation, cases that send shivers down the spine, and criminals whose deeds are nothing short of chilling. Today, we delve into the twisted psyche of a young man whose weapon of choice was not a gun or a knife, but a humble teacup. Graham Frederick Young was born on September 7, 1947, to Fred and Bessie Young in Neasden, previously known as London's loneliest village. Sadly, his mother had pleurisy when she was pregnant and passed away from tuberculosis 3 months after Graham was born. Her passing upset Fred Young, who sent the child to his Aunt Winnie while giving his older sister, Winifred, to their grandparents. The young Graham lived with his aunt and her husband, Jack, for the first 2 years of his life and grew quite close to them. In 1950, when his father remarried and moved the family back to St. Albans with his new wife Molly, Graham was clearly upset at being apart from his aunt. He grew up to be a somewhat odd boy who was isolated in his habits and made no attempt to interact with kids his own age. When he was old enough to read, he preferred spectacular non-fiction books about murders, with Dr. Crippen, the infamous poisoner, as his favorite character. Graham was fascinated from an early age by poisons and their effects, and considered Victorian poisoner William Palmer to be a personal hero. Graham also read extensively about black magic, Adolf Hitler, and Nazi Germany. In 1959, as he passed his 11+ and went to grammar school, he started to read books on advanced toxicology. His only academic interests were chemistry, forensic science, and toxicology, but because the school only covered a small portion of these topics, he was compelled to continue his education through extracurricular reading. Young's father supported him and bought him a chemistry equipment, which kept him occupied for hours at a time. By the age of 13, Graham had a thorough understanding of toxicology that allowed him to deceive local chemists into believing he was 17 and obtain large quantities of the heavy metal thallium as well as the poisons antimony, digitalis, and arsenic for study purposes. In an effort to prove his poison knowledge, Graham chose Christopher Williams, a fellow science student, as his first victim. Williams experienced prolonged nausea, uncomfortable cramps, and headaches as a result of Graham's skillful delivery of a poisonous concoction that perplexed medical professionals. Williams was fortunate to live, most likely because Graham was unable to fully satiate his scientific interest because it was impossible to monitor his victim's health while he was ill at home. He made the decision to concentrate on his own family as he had unrestricted access to them. Initially, Fred, Graham's father, was worried that Graham might be unintentionally poisoning the family by carelessly using his chemistry set at home when the family started to exhibit sporadic symptoms of poisoning in the early part of 1961, but Graham disputed the allegation. Given that Graham had also experienced a variety of illnesses, the possibility of intentional poisoning was never taken into account. It is still unclear if this was done on purpose, to avoid detection, with careful consideration of his own reaction in mind, or simply out of carelessness regarding the precise teacups he had poisoned. When doctors determined that Graham's older sister, Winifred, had been poisoned with belladonna in November 1961, Fred once more suspected him but did nothing. His stepmother, Molly Young, came to be the center of Graham's attentions. She grew sicker over time, and on April 21, 1962, her husband discovered her writhing in agony in their backyard while Graham watched in amazement. After being taken to the hospital, she passed away that evening. Her cause of death was discovered to be a prolapse of a spinal bone, and she was cremated at Graham's suggestion, unsurprisingly. At that time, nothing else was done. Graham was slowly poisoning her with antimony, but it was later revealed that she had grown tolerant to it. The night before she died, he switched to thallium to hasten the process. Even after her funeral, there were reports of additional episodes of nausea and vomiting, proving that Graham's interest in science had not been dampened by the loss of his stepmother. Following Molly's passing, Fred Young's episodes of nausea and cramps increased in frequency and severity. He was also brought to the hospital, where he was given the diagnosis of antimony poisoning. He was fortunate to have survived his son's experimenting, but he could not accept his son's accountability. Graham's school chemistry instructor took on that responsibility when he called the police after finding poisons and a wealth of information about poisoners in Graham's desk. Graham was referred to a police psychiatrist, where his encyclopedic understanding of poisons quickly became obvious. On May 23, 1962, Graham was arrested. Williams, his sister, and his father were all poisoned, and he admitted it, but he was never charged with his stepmother's murder because all of the evidence was erased when she was cremated. He was admitted to Broadmoor Maximum Security Hospital at the age of 14, making him the youngest prisoner there since 1885, for a minimum of 15 years. Prison barely tempered his enthusiasm for research, and within weeks the cyanide poisoning death of another convict, John Barrage, left the prison administration perplexed. Graham asserted that cyanide had been produced from laurel bush leaves, but his admission was not taken seriously, and Barrage's death was classified as a suicide. On other occasions, it was revealed that the drinks of staff and inmates had been tampered with. One incident involved the injection of an abrasive sodium compound, colloquially known as sugar soap, used to prepare painted walls, into a tea urn, which, if it hadn't been discovered, could have poisoned a large number of people. When the authorities made it obvious that appearing less obsessed would hasten his release, he continued to study widely about poisoning but started to keep his obsession a secret more and more. By the late 1960s, Graham's medical professionals appeared unaware of his ongoing fixation with death. In June 1970, they advised his discharge on the grounds that he had been cured. Graham expressed his satisfaction by telling a mental health worker that he planned to murder one person for each year he had spent at Broadmoor. The statement was entered in his file but, amazingly, had no bearing on the decision to release Graham. Graham, who was now 23 and had been freed on February 4, 1971, went to a hostel but kept in touch with his sister Winifred, who had relocated to Hemel Hempstead after getting married. She was more tolerant than her father, who first avoided his son despite the fact that she had been poisoned by him. She was worried about his obsession with his crimes because he took great pleasure in returning to the places where he had committed them and thrived on his former Neasden neighbors' reactions when they realized who he was. In order to stock up on the antimony, thallium, and other poisons needed for his research, he made visits to London. As a result, fellow hostel member Trevor Sparks, 34, began to experience the typical pains and illness that come with being around Graham. Although no connection to Young was found at the time, he became friends with another man who went through such misery that he committed suicide. Graham was hired as a storeman by John Hadland Laboratories, a company that sells photography equipment in Bovingdon, Hertfordshire. His new employers were aware of his time spent at the Broadmoor, but were unaware of his experience as a poisoner. He had already acquired his poison supplies from unwitting London pharmacies, so they would have had some reservations given the ease with which poisons like thallium, commonly used in photography processes, are available. Graham's boss, 59-year-old Bob Eggle, was unconcerned by his willingness to make tea and coffee for his co-workers, so when he started having severe cramps and lightheadedness, it was thought that he had the Bovingdon bug, a virus that had affected a number of nearby schoolchildren. Similar cramps were reported by other Hadland employees, but none were ever as bad as Eggle's. Curiously, Eggle appeared to get better while off work but returned to work right away sicker than before. He was eventually admitted to the hospital, where he passed away on July 7, 1971, while still in great pain. His pneumonia was listed as the cause of death. In September 1971, 60-year-old Fred Biggs started to have symptoms similar to those of Eggle, and overall absenteeism at Hadland sharply climbed as staff members developed a variety of strange and incapacitating illnesses, including the typical cramps, hair loss, and sexual dysfunction. Numerous causes were considered, such as water contamination, radioactive fallout, and chemical leakage at the company itself, but no meaningful headway was made in identifying the root cause. Biggs was eventually sent to the London Hospital for Nervous Diseases, but it took him a while to pass away. Graham expressed his unhappiness with this in his diary. But on November 19, 1971, Biggs finally passed away in agonizing pain. The company was really concerned about this second death since by this point, over 70 people had reported experiencing identical symptoms and there were concerns for individual safety. The on-site doctor made an effort to reassure the staff by stating that health and safety regulations were strictly followed. He was surprised, however, when Graham pressed him in front of his peers about why thallium poisoning had not been considered as a cause given that it was used in the photographic process. The doctor was taken aback by Graham's extensive knowledge of toxicology, and he brought it up to management, who then informed the police. The thallium poisoning was discovered after further forensic investigations. It was the first known instance of this heavy element being intentionally ingested. Graham's poison conviction was quickly discovered, along with his collection of poisons and thorough notebooks documenting the precise amounts given to individuals and their long-term responses to the dosage. On November 21, 1971, Graham was detained in Sheerness, Kent, where he was visiting his father. He was determined to have a significant amount of thallium. He admitted to the poisonings orally during questioning but would not put his signature on a written acknowledgement of guilt. He was obviously enjoying the attention that his court appearance would bring. Graham's trial commenced on June 19, 1972, at St. Albans Crown Court, and he was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of administering poison. Young pleaded not guilty, and seemed confident that he would be acquitted, as his previous conviction could not be entered into evidence, and he felt it would be impossible to identify him as the only person with the means to poison Eggle and Biggs. He was apparently less than thrilled with the moniker the teacup poisoner, which he believed was too parochial and minimized his talent and knowledge. However, he was reportedly delighted with the media buzz that surrounding his trial and tried his best to appear evil in a bid to unnerve the jury and gathering gallery. He considered World Poisoner to be a better title. He hadn't anticipated the developments in forensic science in the 10 years since the death of his stepmother, though, or the impact that the jury would feel after reading passages from his diary in which he calculatingly details the effects of his poisons. As a result, he was found guilty of all charges on June 29, 1972, and was given 4 life sentences. The jury recommended an urgent review of the law regarding the public sale of poisons. Even though Young had been adjudicated legally sane during his trial, the Home Secretary also announced an emergency review of the control, treatment, assessment, and release of mentally disturbed prisoners. The Advisory Board for Restricted Patients was established as a result of the Arvold Report, which was released in January 1973 and changed the manner these convicts were supervised after their release. Graham Young was held in the high-security Parkhurst prison on the Isle of Wight, which houses the most dangerous criminals in Britain and is often only used for people with severe mental illnesses. Here, he made friends with Moore's murderer Ian Brady, who developed feelings for the 24-year-old Young even though they weren't mutual. Young was actually asexual, according to Brady, and was primarily interested in power, medical experimentation, observation, and death. They spent a lot of time playing chess and talking about how fascinated they were with Nazi Germany. Jung frequently wore a Hitler mustache. Graham was overjoyed to see a wax replica of himself beside his childhood hero, Dr. Crippen, in Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors. At the age of 42, Graham Young passed away on August 1, 1990, in his Parkhurst cell. The stated cause of death was heart failure, but there is still speculation that Graham may have been poisoned by fellow convicts who, aside from Brady, were always very wary of him. Another theory is that Graham became weary of prison life and poisoned himself as a last act of self-control. And there it is, the horrifying tale of Graham Young, a murderer who used an unanticipated but lethal weapon. As the Claws and Crime Chronicles comes to a close, we are reminded that the most horrific stories often come from the darkest recesses of human nature. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and keep a watchful eye on the teacup that sits before you. Who knows what secrets it might hold? Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's mysteries. Remember to subscribe, like, and share, and leave a comment as we continue to unearth the enigmatic stories that have shaped our world. Until the next episode, this is Kat from Claws and Crime Chronicles, signing off.